Hey there, tired listener. Before you drift off, let's talk about one of the most memorable experiences you'd have in the Middle Ages: eating. Or, as it was known back then, surviving by chewing anything that didn't die on the same day as you. Yes, because feeding yourself in the medieval world wasn't exactly a pleasure. It was more of an act of passive resistance, featuring the texture of tree bark and the flavor of frustration. And before the boredom fully cradles you, do a favor for the algorithm and my self-esteem. Like this video and subscribe to the channel, because if you don't, YouTube thinks nobody likes boring stories about fungal bread and stops delivering the videos. Then I'm left talking to myself about pottage and sour cheese. Tell me in the comments where you are right now and what time sleep decided to run away. It's always good to know there are more people pulling an all-nighter with me. Now turn off the lights. Let's enter this night journey together. Let's imagine the following scenario. You open your eyes on a medieval morning. Congratulations, you woke up. It's a pity your only reward is a piece of bread that may or may not break your teeth. Oh, and it might have fungus on it, but that's the closest you're going to get to blue cheese in this life. Right away, your stomach starts begging for something hot, tasty, comforting. Spoiler, it's going to be disappointed because what awaits you is a bowl of pottage. It sounds like a fancy recipe name, but in reality it's a medieval sludge that looks like it was created on a lost bet. It is a thick porridge made from leftover grains, half-raw vegetables, water of dubious origin, and whatever remained of yesterday's dignity. The mixture boiled for days or weeks. They just kept throwing more things inside. If there was a carrot, toss it in. A turnip, too. A piece of pigskin found on the floor? Why not? The important thing was to keep the pot bubbling and the stomach's expectations as low as possible. Seasonings? Funny you should ask. Simply put, no. Spices were luxury items, like Wi-Fi in a forest today. Black pepper, for instance, was literally more expensive than gold. A handful of nutmeg cost what you earned in an entire month of rural labor. So no, you won't feel a light touch of spice. You will taste dirt, because that is what was available. If you think bread can save you, I'm sorry. Medieval bread was a weapon in the shape of food, made with coarse flours, sometimes mixed with sawdust, tree bark, or actual clay. It was hard, dry, and more useful as a defense tool than as a meal. Have you ever thought about grating cheese with the bread instead of the other way around? Well, welcome to the 14th century. And then there was the star of dietary misfortune: rye contaminated with ergot, a fungus that caused hallucinations, tremors, and in some cases, death. Eating bread back then was like playing Russian roulette. You never knew if you were going to come out fed or delirious, seeing goblins on the ceiling of your hut. Oh, and the drink, of course, because it's morning, you're hungry, thirsty, and hopeless. Water? Don't even think about it. Drinking water was a direct passport to intestinal purgatory. Medieval water came from rivers, wells, ditches, the same place where you dumped the contents of the chamber pot. So yes, the safe option was ale, weak, warm, and fermented in conditions that would make a health inspector faint. Everyone drank it, adults, children, the elderly, and that gentleman you thought was dead but was just dehydrated. Ale was coffee, it was juice, it was a health tonic and a pastime. And before you think about celebrating, remember that it was an ale without much alcohol, but with a lot of doubt. Did it cure thirst? Yes. Did it cure the will to live? That is another story entirely. And no, you aren't going to eat meat. No. Meat was a rare item. Like dessert on a diet, it only appeared at religious festivals or when your feudal lord decided to be generous. And by generous, understand, he gave you a piece of entrails boiled in brown water. And there was cheese too, sour, hard, moldy, and stored in conditions so bad that even the rats avoided it. But since no one had a refrigerator, cheese was like a travel companion. It sat there evolving on its own. Sometimes it developed a personality of its own. There was cheese that you looked at, and it looked back at you, and to season this culinary marvel, you had onion. It was the only flavor allowed by the economy and by religion. Sometimes garlic, sometimes tears. While you complain about the price of food delivery, remember, your ancestors chewed root soup with sawdust bread and called that a meal. And even so, you still needed to give thanks because having food was already a privilege. In years of bad harvest, people ate grass, literally, or tree bark soup, or nothing, and you thinking your Monday was bad. You continue there in front of your bowl of pottage. It bubbles slowly, releasing a smell that vaguely resembles wet earth with a touch of rat. Maybe. The medieval sense of smell, fortunately, is less demanding than the modern one. After a few weeks in this scenario, your brain simply gives up distinguishing the smell of food from the smell of decomposition. The spoon, if we can call it a spoon, is a piece of wood carved crookedly, probably used by 3 generations before reaching your hands. It is slightly cracked, stained by time and by things you prefer not to investigate. You dip it into the pottage with the delicacy of someone testing the temperature of lava, the sticky consistency, the color, a grayish-beige tone that no artist would dare to name. The taste, surprisingly absent, which is actually good, considering that any extra flavor would likely come from a drowned insect. You chew slowly, not because you are savoring it, of course, but because it is difficult to swallow discouragement in a hurry. And while you swallow that hot mass of caloric sadness, your neighbor next to you eats exactly the same thing. Because here, cuisine doesn't have identity, it has survival. Beside the pottage rests the bread, a compact, dense, and aggressive piece. Yes, because this bread isn't just hard, it is hostile. You pick it up carefully, avoiding it tearing your skin or activating some kind of ancestral curse. Give thanks to the gods for still having teeth, because after 2 bites, you're probably going to lose one. And before you ask, yes, the bread is moldy. But mold was just special moisture in the Middle Ages. It wasn't a defect, it was texture, a touch of charm in the absence of decent fermentation. Oh, and if you are very lucky, the bread might have a resident, a little bug, larva, or thing that moves when you break it, which is great because protein was rare, right? And speaking of luck, today is market day. You decide to go out to try something different, maybe trade an egg for some greens, or sell your soul in exchange for half an onion. The path to the market is, as always, an adventure. The ground is mud, mixed with everything that ever came out of a living organism. Feces, blood, urine, unfulfilled promises. You walk trying to dodge the holes and the odor, but there is no escape. It is as if the air were seasoned with misery and sweat. Arriving at the fair, the spectacle begins. Improvised stalls with filthy fabrics. Old women shouting prices that haven't changed in decades. Children running barefoot with the face of someone who has already given up on childhood. You find a cheese seller. He has a suspicious smile and a wheel of something that might have been milk in some distant past. The smell is strong, the type of strong that offends even the nose of someone who sleeps next to a pig. But you ask the price. He answers something absurd. You laugh. He doesn't. You stare at each other for a second, each conscious of the tragedy in which you live. You give up on the cheese. You move on and find a lady selling turnips, many of them, because apparently that is the only thing that grows with joy in medieval soil. Turnips. You pick one up. It is soft. It doesn't matter. You already gave up on hope a few blocks back. Back at home, it's time for lunch, which to simplify matters is exactly the same as breakfast. Pottage. Only now with a little piece of turnip floating in it, which is considered a gourmet touch. You try to imagine it's something different. You close your eyes, pretend you are at a banquet. Spoiler, you aren't. You are in a dark hut, smelling of wet wool and rats, holding a meeting under the bed. And since we talked about banquets, let's be honest. Banquets were only for nobles, and even then they were kind of suspicious. The rich ate meat, lots of meat. But since there wasn't much quality control, the meat generally came with surprises. Larvae, bones, and at special parties, gout. Yes, the famous disease of excess meat. A gift of ostentation. Meanwhile, you continue there with your broth of nothing, bomb, bread and turnip, emotionally unstable. Your only dessert is a positive thought that maybe tomorrow there will be a whole onion. And about fruit? Almost a legend. They only appear in the right season. And even then, only if no one more important took them first. Eating fruit in the summer was considered a luxury. Eating it in the winter, a wet dream of a rotten apple. You chew the bread for the third time and start to think your left tooth gave way. It is just a crack, but you already know. A broken tooth now means constant pain for the rest of your life. Congratulations. You won an oral reminder of your insignificance. And even with all this indescribable sensory experience, you still give thanks because you had food, and that is already a reason for celebration. The neighboring village didn't have any. They had the plague. They also had pottage. Now they have only silence. You wash your bowl with a dirty cloth, wipe your hand on your sweaty mouth and take a deep breath. You taste something strange. It could be the turnip, it could be the beginning of a stomach infection. Hard to say, and honestly, you don't even care anymore. The day goes on. And dinner? Well, dinner is the same as lunch, which was the same as breakfast, and will be the same as tomorrow's. Because if there is one thing that never changes in the Middle Ages, it is the persistent flavor of a lack of options. And you thinking that eating leftovers was bad, you've already had lunch. I mean, if you can call that lunch. The piece of mashed turnip is still spinning in your stomach, as if trying to decide whether it's worth being digested or if it's going to exit the way it entered. But there is no time for that, because now starts the fun part of the day. Work. And no, it isn't like, I'll just open my notebook and pretend I'm in a meeting. It is the type of work where your body pays interest for having woken up. You walk to the field with the same excitement as someone going to receive a fine, and arrive there with a shovel in hand, sun on your face, and the certainty that every second from now on will be a physical reminder that life is, at minimum, unfair. The field is dry. The soil looks like it's made of crushed stone with a touch of contempt. You have to dig. You don't know exactly why. No one explained, but digging is the verb of the Middle Ages. Dig, pull, carry, and repeat until your back starts to emit small internal screams. Your instrument of work is a rudimentary tool made with chipped wood and rusty nails. It looks more like a medieval trap than a tool. Instead of cutting the earth, it just pushes the frustration deeper. You dig into yourself because someone said you need to. Because if you don't do it, you don't eat. And if you don't eat, you don't dig. An elegant cycle of agricultural despair. Around you, more people doing the same, all with expressions that vary between "I've already died inside" and "I'm waiting for my time." There is an elderly man digging with one hand and coughing with the other. The cough lasts long enough for you to think he is going to fall. He doesn't fall, he just goes back to digging, because dying would be resting. And rest is only on Sunday, maybe. The women are there too, taking care of children in their laps, pulling buckets of water, feeding chickens and still planting. All at the same time, of course, because multitasking already existed. It just wasn't valued. And the children, well, they work too. From the age of 5, you already earn your mini-tool and your quota of blisters on your hands. No school, no childhood, just small human beings being trained to give up early. You lift your head for a second, hoping to see clouds, shade, anything. But the sky laughs in your face. Direct sun, no trees, no truce. Sweat runs down your back, mixes with the dust, creates a personal mud, a kind of uncomfortable armor that sticks to every part of the body that still feels anything. You feel thirst, but remember the watery beer you brought in a clay container. You take a sip. It is warm with a slightly acidic taste, perhaps fermented too much, but it doesn't kill you, and that is already a luxury. Time passes slowly. The sun seems stopped. You have already dug enough to think the world became lighter, but hours of work remain, and there is no official break. What exists is the moment you fall to your knees and someone kicks you to get up. The foreman passes by inspecting. He does nothing. He just walks from one side to the other with the face of someone who judges. Sometimes he yells, other times he just points. And if you waver, you hear about it. If you question, you get beaten. He works less than you, but earns more. The medieval hierarchy. You suffer, he supervises, and everyone pretends this makes sense. At some moment, the church bell rings. It isn't the end. It is just a reminder that you are still alive, or at least you should be. You continue with hands full of calluses, skin starting to crack, and a stone in your shoe, which you call a shoe, but is just a piece of cloth tied to your foot. Sometimes an older gentleman appears with a cart. He collects the baskets full of vegetables that no one wants to eat. You help push. He releases a sigh that seems to have come from the previous century. No one talks, because talking is a waste of energy, and energy here is rare currency. The smell of the field mixes sweat, earth, animal, and a pinch of hopelessness. You don't feel it properly anymore, but you know it is there and will continue there until the sun disappears, because that is the rule. The day only ends when the light ends, and even then, sometimes, it continues. If it is harvest season, you work until stumbling in the dark, and there is no remuneration. You aren't accumulating points, nor receiving a bonus. Your salary is food, if there is any left. Sometimes not even that, because the feudal lord has priority. You cultivate what is his and hope he lets you keep the scraps. The worst part is that there is no choice. You were born in this field. You will die in this field. Perhaps buried right there with a crooked cross and a poorly said prayer. The earth you dig today is the same that will swallow you tomorrow. Poetic? Not really. Just inevitable. When it finally gets dark, your muscles are on strike. Your fingers don't close anymore. You walk back home, dragging your feet, because lifting them is asking too much. Each step is a living reminder of your condition and of the straw that awaits you for sleep, if the lice allow it. Arriving home is a questionable relief, because what you find is a dark, stuffy space full of people. The dinner food is the same as lunch. The conversation, if it exists, revolves around tragedies and the neighbor who disappeared yesterday. No one wants to know. Everyone already has too much tragedy. You sit in a corner, take a deep breath. Your whole body throbs. You smell your clothes, a mixture of wool, sweat, and something that shouldn't be alive but is. And you think that tomorrow there is more. Same shovel, same field, same silence. But at least today it didn't rain. You arrive home after a whole day digging the soil with a tool that seems to have been made by a personal enemy. The body hurts. Every muscle, even the ones you didn't even know existed, is screaming. But there is no hot bath, no relaxing massage, no lo-fi playlist. What there is what there always was. A wooden basin, a filthy cloth, and a foolish hope that this counts as cleaning. The water inside the basin is lukewarm, and not because someone heated it. It's lukewarm because it stayed in the sun all day along with mosquitoes, dust, and possibly a grasshopper leg. You wet the cloth, wring it out, pass it over your face. The cloth comes out dirtier than it went in. And that is the closest you will get to a spa. Soap, funny you should think of that. The idea of scrubbing the body with something scented and antiseptic would be considered pure witchcraft. The most you have is ash mixed with animal fat. And even then, only at festivals. On normal days, what cleans is faith. Your hair, which was once hair one day, has turned into a colony of lice. They are there firmly, living better than you. There are already generations being born. A kind of vertical condominium on your scalp. Sometimes it itches so much you think about shaving it all off. But shave with what? With the pot spoon? You try not to think about it. You lie down on the straw, feel something move. It could be a rat, it could be your spine trying to escape your own body. You sigh, but the air comes in dense, smelling of people. Tired, sweaty people, compacted into 20 square meters. It is the beauty of shared life. Everyone together, without a door, without a wall, without privacy, and of course without ventilation. And the bed? Ah, the bed. A cluster of straw, rags and mites in the shape of a nightmare. You arrange yourself as best you can, trying not to touch the wet side. There is always a wet side. You don't know what caused it. No one knows. They just accept it. After all, accepting is the first step to surviving. The cough starts in the corner of the room. It's the uncle or the neighbor or the guy who just showed up there yesterday and stayed. It doesn't matter. The cough is deep, the kind that even has rhythm. You listen, hoping it's not contagious. Spoiler, it is, but it's already too late. The air you share also carries diseases, fungi, and small respiratory nightmares. The flu rarely comes alone. It brings fever, chills, and a sequence of sweats that make it seem like you ran a marathon, but you're just lying there, sweating and praying. If you have an infection, congratulations, you just unlocked Middle Ages hard mode. But relax, there is a solution. You can go to the village healer, that gentleman who mixes wine, herbs, and prayer. Sometimes he rubs a stone on your face and says it is the spirit of the rat that is curing you. Other times he suggests blood. Yours, of course, because bad blood has to come out. Yes, we are talking about the glorious practice of bloodletting. Do you have a fever? Cut a vein. Are you sad? Take out a liter. Lost weight? Lose a little more. Medieval medicine is like a malicious guess from destiny. Nothing is tested, everything is risky. And if you survive, it was luck. And if the pain is physical, like a fracture, well, then we have the barber surgeon, a man who cuts hair in the morning and amputates legs in the afternoon. He has a rusty blade, a rope to bite on, and a technique that consists of screaming along with you until it's over. There is no anesthesia, there is no asepsis, there is only faith and a real chance of you leaving there with fewer limbs than you entered with. If you have a wound, the dressing is made with dirty cloth, pig oil, and hope. You tie it with leather strips, pray for flies not to land on it, and try not to look too much, because if it starts to smell strange, it is too late. The infection is already packing its bags to take you away. Women, then, live a separate chapter of suffering, because besides all this, they still have the privilege of giving birth in a dark corner of the house, squatting with a midwife who learned the trade from her grandmother, who also died in childbirth. The chance of coming out alive, moderate. The chance of coming out alive and without sequelae, practically zero. And if by chance you are menstruating, congratulations. Prepare to stuff a piece of cloth between your legs, walk sideways, and be judged by half the village, because menstrual blood is still treated like black magic. If you touch bread, it molds. If you look at a cow, she stops giving milk. And if you try to explain that this is just biology, you become a witch. You feel itching on your body. It could be scabies, it could be fleas, it could be your own skin resigning. Dermatology here is based on vinegar and internal screams. If the spot itches, you ignore it. If it bleeds, you cover it. If it grows, you accept it. And speaking of accepting, everyone stinks. No one notices anymore. The medieval sense of smell was turned off for reasons of psychological survival. You only notice when a noble passes by because they stink differently. They stink of sour perfume and rich people's disease. Even so, it is preferable to the smell of your neighbor, who hasn't taken a bath since the last harvest. And if everything goes wrong, there is the plague, the pestilence, the queen of diseases. One day you are fine, harvesting cabbage. The next you have boils, fever, and are being pushed with a stick into a common ditch, without ceremony, without warning. Just an accelerated death, with a soundtrack of howls and bells tolling non-stop. But today, for some strange reason, you are still alive, itching, sweating, coughing, but alive. Lying in a damp corner, listening to the collective snore of an overcrowded house. You close your eyes, but you don't sleep, because sleeping well is not part of the package. You just rest a little, because tomorrow the straw rat will wake you up before the sun. You wake up with a bite on your leg. You don't know if it was a flea, a rat, or just the weight of existence wanting to warn you that the day has started. Your head is still heavy from the night before, but not because of wine. It is just the damp straw pillow smelling of chicken. The sun hasn't even come out properly, but the noise in the street has already begun. People shouting, goats bleating, and a bell tolling without the slightest compassion for your tiredness. You get up, scratching what is left of your dignity. Today is market day, and that means that technically you are going to socialize. Yes, because social life in the Middle Ages was this: walking among equally dirty people, hearing rumors, buying wilted onions, and hoping not to catch a new disease just by touching the wooden counter of the fish tent. You walk to the center of the village. On the way, you pass crooked houses, full of smoke coming out through the cracks, with children playing with animal bones. The closest thing there is to a toy. An old lady says good morning to you, or curses you. Hard to know. The intonation is the same. At the market, the atmosphere is lively, in the sense of a noisy and smelly chaos. People shout offers for products that clearly aren't worth the price. A piece of soap the size of an olive pit is worth half a chicken. A semi-fresh fish that is already looking crookedly at you costs a sack of barley. Everything is negotiable, including your patience. You hear rumors that a man was hanged for stealing a loaf of bread, that the blacksmith's daughter ran away with a monk, that the king is going to increase the tax on mud. That's right, mud, because even the sludge you slip on can be taxed. As you walk, you try to socialize with someone, an acquaintance from the village perhaps, but all the conversation revolves around harvests, diseases, and the number of people who died this week. Dark humor is the only type of humor available. Jokes about the plague are considered light. Laughter is rare, and when it happens it lasts little, because there is always someone coughing blood nearby. You find a circle of women spinning wool. They speak softly, exchange glances, and you know the true power of the village lives there. Information, judgment, and small emotional revenges. You think about approaching, but remember that last week you spilled dirty water near one of them. Better not. By the way, no one forgets anything. The medieval grudge is a form of hobby. The neighbor who lent you the pot 2 years ago is still waiting for the lid back and comments on it every time you pass. It doesn't matter if the lid disappeared in a fire. What matters is that you failed as a person. Sometimes a party happens. Party, in this case, means gathering around a barrel of weak beer, a musician with 3 fingers playing an out-of-tune lute, and someone trying to dance without stepping in manure. But even so, it is the highlight of the month. People laugh, dance, forget for a few hours that life is a sequence of fungus, cold, and funerals. If you are single, this type of event is also a marriage market. Medieval Tinder is simple. You look, someone looks back. The families shake hands, and presto, arranged marriage. There is no getting to know each other better, nor swapping likes. There is obligation, tiredness, and children, many children who come as fast as the debts. Being single for a long time is suspicious, especially if you are a woman. If you are over 25 and still haven't married, congratulations, you are already a possible witch. If you like medicinal plants, then it goes without saying. Any bellyache you cure can turn into proof of a demonic pact. By the way, witch hunting is an occasional pastime. It's enough for someone to accuse you of looking crookedly at the wrong cow, and that's it. Bonfire, or water, or stone. The tests vary, but they all involve pain, public shame, and the minimal chance of getting out alive. You decide to leave the market and visit the church, because despite everything, it is the only place where the roof doesn't leak and no one is selling something rotten. But don't get excited. The church isn't a place of comfort, it is a place of fear. There, hell is the protagonist. The walls have images of eternal suffering, demons pulling souls, people being boiled alive. It is like a horror movie, but with a blessing. In the end, the priest speaks in Latin you don't understand, no one understands, but everyone pretends they do. To avoid suspicion, you kneel, cross your arms, and ask forgiveness for sins you don't even remember committing. Eating meat on a Friday, desiring the neighbor's cheese, thinking about sleeping in. Any of them can send you to hell. Better not to risk it. After Mass, more conversation, more judgment. An old lady whispers about someone's shoe. Another comments that a boy was seen gathering too much firewood. That is a sign of greed. Greed, of course, is a sin. Sin leads to the plague. And the plague, well, you already understood. You return home at the end of the day. The sun is setting and for a brief moment everything becomes orange and even beautiful. But then you remember that beauty doesn't fill a belly and that dinner is the same broth of sadness with weapon bread. There is still time for a final piece of gossip with the neighbors. A story about the guy from the upper village who tried to raise ducks and is now in debt up to his neck. No one knows how he is going to pay. No one is going to help, but everyone is going to laugh, because deep down the suffering of others always relieves our own a little. You enter the house, lock the wooden door with a stone, and throw yourself on the straw. You take a deep breath. It still itches, still hurts. But at least today you weren't accused of witchcraft, and if it doesn't rain inside your house today, you can consider that everything went well. You are at home in the dark, with your belly growling and skin itching as if it were trying to escape your own body, and you think at least the nobles lived well, right? Yes. And no. I mean, maybe, but also no. Let's start with the castle, because when you think of noble life in the Middle Ages, the image that comes to mind is a huge hall, lit fireplace, soft music, wine being served by silent servants. But the reality, a damp stone cube, freezing, full of echoes, smoke and suspicions of betrayal, like an emotional refrigerator, only without food. The castle has no heating. The fireplace exists, sure, but the smoke doesn't know where to go because the chimney is a concept that is still in the testing phase. Result, the main hall looks like a soot sauna. You leave there with a chronic cough and burning eyes. Congratulations. Now you are noble and asthmatic, and the clothes, ah yes, layers and more layers of thick fabric embroidered with threads that are worth more than your life. It looks elegant, it seems, until the moment you need to use the bathroom. And then you realize that to take all that off requires 2 servants, 5 minutes, and a lot of willpower. By the way, bathroom, a word that doesn't apply very well to the context. Even in the castle, there is no flush, nor paper, nor soap. There is a little room called a garderobe, with a hole in the wall that leads straight to the moat. A charming detail. Sometimes enemies discovered this path and invaded the castle through there. That's right, through the glorious drain. But let's go to the luxury, the food. Yes, the nobles ate better. Game meat, poultry, savory pies, exotic dishes. But the word better here is relative, because they seasoned everything with what they had, which included a lot of vinegar, pepper, if they were truly rich, and sometimes sugar on meat for aesthetics. And since everything was made in stuffy, dirty kitchens with more smoke than a fire in a ship's smokestack, the cooks were covered in soot, cutting meat with rusty knives, trying not to die intoxicated by smoke or from some live animal that escaped the spit. The result was a banquet with incredible appearance and the taste of confusion. Sometimes, the main course came with a roast pigeon, decorated with its own feathers. It was considered refined and completely indigestible. The noble ate, belched and drank wine of dubious quality to push it down. Speaking of wine, yes, they drank a lot, because water was a risk even for the rich. But since wine was expensive, most mixed it with water. Result, watered-down wine, or water soured with alcohol, depending on your perspective. Still, much better than beer fermented in a wooden bucket reused from the laundry. And the nobles had a problem that you, as a miserable peasant, probably will never have. Gout, the disease of the rich, caused by eating too much meat, too much wine, too much luxury. It deformed the joints, hurt like divine punishment, and transformed toes into small works of crooked sculpture. It was the price of living well. But nothing surpassed the internal drama of the court: intrigues, gossip, jealousy, arranged marriages, betrayals, poisonings. It was like a reality show episode, only with less lighting and more syphilis. No one trusted anyone. Everyone smiled with rotten teeth and a dagger hidden in their sleeve. And even with all this luxury, the nobles also stank, because bathing was scarce. They bathed once a month, if that, and used strong, sweet, suffocating perfume to disguise it. The result was a cloud of sweat and dead flowers floating throughout the castle. You think, but they had soft beds, right? Yes, beds with canopies, cushions, heavy blankets, but also lice, bedbugs, and quilts that never saw water. Sometimes the mattresses were stuffed with feathers, sometimes with noble straw, that is, the luxury of the noble itch. The comfort of sleeping in the fetal position while hearing strange noises coming from under the bed. Probably the royal rat. And if you were a noble woman, then yes, congratulations. Your function was to serve as political currency. Be married at 12, pregnant at 13, widowed at 16, and repeat the process until the uterus handed in its resignation. The only way out was to become a nun, but even that came with its penances, vows, and eternal fasting from any form of freedom. You could be rich, but you were still a woman. And that in the Middle Ages put you 2 steps below even your husband's horse. The children were raised by wet nurses, then sent to other castles as pages or ladies-in-waiting. That is, if they didn't die before learning to speak. Because yes, the infant mortality rate among nobles was also high, only with more candles lit at the funeral. Oh, and the titles? Count of I don't know what, Baron of where nobody cares, a bunch of important people for absolutely nothing. Most only existed to manage lands they never set foot on and receive taxes from peasants who barely knew the count had a name. In the end, living at the top was different, but not necessarily better. It was dying cleaner, perhaps more decorated, but still dying of infection, still drinking suspicious water, still being treated with leeches and diagnoses based on bodily humor. You think, if I were noble, would I have escaped all this? And the answer is no. You just would have died with more style, maybe with a ring on your finger and an embroidered tunic, but still with fever, diarrhea, and a doctor offering you goat urine as treatment. At the end of the day, everyone, nobles and commoners, breathed the same contaminated air, ate suspicious animals, and prayed not to wake up with black spots on their necks. The difference is that the peasant died in silence and the noble with a speech. You are walking through the village, returning from the market, when you see a small crowd near the main square. And since boredom is your favorite hobby since you were born, you approach. There are people laughing, children on their parents' shoulders, an old lady selling hard bread in the corner. A party atmosphere, but it isn't a party. It is an execution. Yes, because in the Middle Ages, hanging someone was public entertainment, like a show, only with less music and more trauma. The person there in the center, tied to a post, isn't smiling, but the audience is. Because let's agree, Anything that doesn't involve digging, coughing, or eating turnips is considered quality distraction. You stand there watching without knowing exactly what the person did. Stole bread, spoke ill of the feudal lord, looked crookedly at the wrong cow. It doesn't matter. In medieval justice, details are irrelevant. The rule is simple. If someone accuses you, you have a problem. If two accuse you, you are already half dead. If the priest agrees, goodbye. And there is no such thing as proof. The neighbor's word is worth more than your alibi, especially if the neighbor is kind of friends with the uncle of the baker of the foreman. In other words, the gossip network is worth more than any investigation. You've already heard stories of people who were arrested for walking too barefoot, a sign of witchcraft, or for sneezing at the wrong time, a sign of demonic possession. A woman was once accused of bewitching a well just because she looked at it, and seconds later, someone felt sick. Coincidence, of course. But trying to explain that without getting burned is a rare gift. The law here is written, but no one knows how to read, which is convenient, because that way it can be reinterpreted at any moment by anyone who has a deeper voice and a dirtier beard. You don't understand how it works, but you have already understood that it is better not to draw attention. The punishments vary. If it is a light thing, like stealing a rotten apple, you might be whipped in public 10, 20, 50 times. With luck, you'll just faint. With bad luck, you lose a piece of your body along the way. If it is more grave, like defying the established order or having your own opinion, then comes mutilation. A finger less, a nose, an ear, sometimes a mark on the forehead so everyone knows you are no good. But there is worse. The trial by ordeal. That's right, a classic. It is the famous "let's let God decide." You are thrown into the water. If you sink, you are innocent. If you float, you are guilty. Beautiful, right? Either you die drowned like a saint or burn at the stake like a floating heretic. Another common test is that of the boiling hand. You stick your hand into a pot with boiling water to pick up a stone. Then they wait 3 days. If the burn heals well, you are innocent. If it gets infected, guilty. Science, in this case, goes by the name of blind faith and a cauldron. And don't think the noble escaped all this, no. Just that when he was accused, he received a special trial, the duel. Did you offend someone's honor? Then prepare to fight to the death with swords, or hammers, or sticks. And whoever survived was right, because clearly God supports whoever has more motor skill and less cramp. But let's go back to the village. The execution ends. The body stays hanging there for days, sometimes weeks, to remind everyone that thinking too much is dangerous. Children grow up seeing corpses like someone seeing a lamppost. It is part of the landscape. You pass by it on the way to fetch water. You dodge the dried blood like someone dodging horse manure, and there is still the spectacle of the pillory, a wooden trunk in the middle of the village where people are tied up and publicly humiliated. They get beaten, spat on, ridiculed. And if you laugh too loud, be careful. The next one could be you. No one likes those who have too much fun. You remember the story of a kid who drew a strange face on a wall. They said it was a caricature of the bishop. He swore it was just a random monster, but too late. He was beaten until he lost his baby teeth, and the others too. The mother cried. The bishop didn't. Another memory comes. The guy who shouted, "This is unfair," when the mud tax increased. Never seen again. They say he became a servant in a convent in the north, but they also say he became fertilizer. Depends on who you ask. You, who until now just wanted to buy 2 eggs and go back home, already have a headache from so much tension. The only rule here is not to draw attention, speak little, walk the line, obey, and hope no one with influence takes issue with your face. Medieval justice isn't blind. It sees very well and chooses whom to punish, based on who has the least chance of defending themselves. The poor, the stranger, the different, you. And if you think you can escape by fleeing to another village, good luck, because each one has its own rules, its own foreman, its own priest, with a strong opinion on what heresy is. Fleeing can make you even more suspicious. An outsider without origin? Ambulatory heresy. At this point, you have already decided that being invisible is the best life plan. Work quietly, eat quietly, suffer in silence. Because the only way to live here is not to be noticed. And even so, sometimes bad luck chooses you. Back at home, you lock the door. Not because it is going to stop anything, it is just a loose board, but because it is the symbolic gesture of someone who still pretends to have some control. You lie down on the straw, look at the wooden ceiling where the spiders live, and think, today I didn't die, which for the era already counts as a victory. You wake up to the sound of the church bell. It rings with a strange enthusiasm for a place that lives promising the end of the world. 3 long chimes, then 2 shorter ones, and a final one that sounds like a warning. Get up or burn in hell. You stretch slowly so as not to dislocate anything, and remember, it is mandatory Mass day. The church is the only stone building in the village, large, cold, and slightly threatening. You enter with your head down, not out of humility, but because the roof is too low at the entrance, and the last guy who tried to act haughty took a headbutt in the name of God. Inside, the priest is turned away, murmuring in Latin. You don't understand a word, but pretend you do. Everyone does this, because appearing pious is worth more than being so. And asking the meaning of words is the type of curiosity that puts you in a bonfire faster than you can say Ave Maria. You kneel, the bench creaks, the wood pokes, the cold from the floor rises up your legs like a frozen blessing. And while you try to find a position, the sermon begins. Theme of the day, sin. Theme of last week, sin. And of the next, spoiler, it will still be sin. Sinning is the official sport of the Middle Ages. You sin when you eat too much, when you eat too little, when you laugh out loud, when you feel anger, when you feel anything. Even dreaming can be a sin, depending on the content and who saw you sleeping. And if you have any impure thought, then congratulations, hell awaits you with a red carpet. Thinking about meat on a holy day, condemned. Thinking about someone who isn't your medieval spouse, that one you barely know and who stinks just like you, condemned too. By the way, while you are here trying to understand if the sermon is about humility or about wheat, it is worth remembering that this calm voice that threatens you with eternal damnation also sells indulgences. Yes, that little piece of forgiveness paid for in installments of sacks of barley. In other words, you sinned, you paid, you're clean. God forgives, the priest collects. But of course, you already knew that, because last week you saw a man pay 3 sacks of flour just to get his brother out of purgatory. No one knows if it worked, but the priest smiled. And around here, that is already considered a miracle. While the sermon continues, your mind starts to wander. You look at the altar, a bunch of candles, a half-crooked wooden cross, a statue with a face of eternal suffering, and you there without understanding half of it, hungry, cold, and with the feeling that maybe, just maybe, you would be better off sleeping. But sleeping in Mass? Careful, because the busybody in the 3rd row is watching. He knows who snoozes, and whoever snoozes doubts. And whoever doubts deserves punishment. And whoever deserves punishment, well, you know the end of that sentence. The Gregorian chant begins. A chorus of dragging voices, as if salvation depended on slowness. You follow with a fixed gaze, but only because you blinked too much yesterday and don't want to repeat the shame of drooling on the bench. The woman next to you makes the sign of the cross 6 times a minute. You try to keep up, miss the direction, pretend you sneezed. No one notices, or they pretend they didn't notice. And then, in the middle of so much penance, so much guilt, so much fear, a pause, a brief silence. The priest looks at everyone and reminds them, good needs to be shared. It is about faith, of course, but you take the opportunity to remember that this content here, as boring as it may be, also needs to circulate. So if you can make a gesture of virtual charity, like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because if even divine forgiveness depends on contribution, imagine a boring history channel smelling of old soup. But returning, the Mass ends with the priest announcing more rules. Do not wear green on Wednesdays. Do not sing loudly. Do not step on the shadow of the crucifix at noon. You take mental notes, even knowing you are going to forget, because remembering everything would also be a sin, that of vanity. Outside, the people disperse. Some go to the field, others stay whispering. You try to leave in silence, but an old lady pulls you by the sleeve. She wants to know if you heard about a certain João who saw a wolf and swore it was the devil in disguise. You shake your head, say no. She looks at you crookedly, and now you are sure you're going to become the village's new topic. You go back home carrying more guilt than barley and try to understand the system. A distant god, a nervous priest, rules changing every week, invisible sins, and constant punishments. Religion in the Middle Ages doesn't console. It reminds you that you are flawed, reminds you that you are in debt, reminds you that even breathing wrong can cost dearly. You try to pray before sleeping, but the prayer is long and your back already hurts. You decide to improvise. Lord, deliver me from the plague, from hunger, from the neighbor's cough, and from the judgment of the midwife on the corner. You close your eyes. You feel guilt for not having prayed properly. You open them again, start again, forget the middle part, restart, fall asleep in the middle of the last sentence and dream of hell. But it isn't even that different from your routine. You thought being an adult in the Middle Ages was difficult? Just wait to remember what it was like to be a child, or rather what it wasn't. Because childhood, the way you know it, with cartoons, playgrounds, and time to exist, simply hadn't been invented yet. Here, whoever is born works. And if they don't work, they get beaten until they understand the dynamic. You were about 5 years old when you got your first official task, scaring crows away from the plantation with a stick and an embarrassing noise. If you scared the crows, you got a piece of bread. If you didn't scare them, the crows ate the crops and you ate a scolding. A simple, cruel, and efficient logic. Toys. There were some. It was called random piece of wood. If it was curved, it became a horse. If it had a point, it became a sword. If it hurt someone, it became a punishment, and thus was born imagination with pain. You grew up listening to stories told by adults with tired voices, missing teeth and a faint smell of sour soup. Stories that involved demonic wolves, monks with magical powers, and children who didn't obey and ended up. No one said how, only that they ended. And that was already enough. School? Only if you were very lucky or rich or both, because studying was a luxury reserved for few. The majority learned to live by watching the elders do everything the wrong way and surviving by a miracle. You learned to plant by watching someone plant. You learned to pray by watching someone cough between one Our Father and another. And you learned not to complain by watching the neighbor be beaten for trying to complain. Adolescence, in case you reached it, was short. At 12, you were already half adult. At 14, totally. At 15, with luck, married. With less luck, already widowed. And with even more bad luck, with 3 children and 2 teeth. By the way, if you were a woman, your adolescence was basically a tutorial in suffering. Menstruation without pads, arranged marriage, pregnancy after pregnancy, and collective judgment for absolutely everything. You could die in childbirth at 16 and would still be called stubborn for not having obeyed some superstition about eating turnips under the wrong moon. If you were a man, you didn't escape either. You worked double, got beaten double, and still had to prove courage by killing an animal, carrying a stone, or facing the plague without flinching. because crying was a sign of weakness, and weakness was the shortest path to contempt and the cemetery. And speaking of the cemetery, let's talk about old age. Have you seen an old person around here? Few. Because living to old age was considered a miracle, life expectancy, something between if it works out and not really. The majority died young from diseases that today you treat with paracetamol. Those who survived became local legends, but decaying legends, full of aches, missing teeth, and distant stares. A medieval elder didn't retire. He just stopped when the body said, "Enough." Even so, sometimes he was forced to continue, even if sitting sharpening tools or telling stories to children who pretended to pay attention. And there was no third age, there was only age and the end. The bones hurt, but there was no medicine. The skin itched, but no one knew why. The knee creaked, and the treatment was a wet cloth with vinegar and hope. And when eyesight began to fail, you just started being ignored, because if you don't see, you don't help. And if you don't help, you take up space. But there was something in common between the young and the old, the lack of options. You didn't choose your profession, nor your routine, nor your partner, nor your religion. Born a peasant, die digging. Born a woman, die birthing. Born with some disability, die before becoming a statistic. You don't choose what to wear. It is always the same rags. You don't choose what to eat. It is what there is. And you definitely don't choose how to live. Everything was already chosen by someone before you were born. Probably a bored feudal lord sitting in an uncomfortable chair eating undercooked meat. Freedom was a concept reserved for books that no one read, because reading, as you know, is a skill for those who don't need to work all day. You even saw a book once in the priest's hands. It was thick, heavy, and smelled of candle wax and fungus. No one could touch it, only listen and believe every word as if it were law. You grow up hearing that life is like this, that suffering is normal, that complaining is a sin, and that thinking of another reality is a moral deviation. And you believe it, because everyone believes it, or pretends to believe, which is safer. Life goes on with births, marriages, deaths, and no anesthesia in between. The rituals mark time, but relieve nothing. The only constant is tiredness and fear. Fear of getting sick, of being accused, of losing someone, of not having enough to eat. Fear of being forgotten, or worse, remembered for the wrong reasons. And even so, you live. Drag your feet, count the days, collect calluses and scars. And sometimes in the middle of all this, there is a moment, a silly laugh, a smell of fresh bread, even if it's from 2 days ago, a short conversation around the fire, small things that for a second seem to make sense. But then someone sneezes too close and the fear returns. Because here, a sneeze can be the beginning of the end, or just the wind or the devil. Hard to say. You lie down again, listening to the silence of the night cut by the noises of human discomfort. You think about the village children, how they are going to grow up and repeat it all again. About the old man on the corner who sleeps sitting up because his spine locked. And about yourself, in the middle of this cycle, just trying not to be the next on the list of the forgotten. And it isn't that you want more. You just wanted a dry pillow. You are lying there trying to sleep when you feel something walking on your arm. A light step, then another. You don't react because you already know. It is one more rat, the third of the week. And honestly, this one already seems like family. In the Middle Ages, the concept of a pet is flexible. There is no pet shop, no grooming. The most care you see is when the village dog gets a bone left over from supper and still has to fight a child and 2 crows for it. Animals are everywhere. On the floor of your house, in the ceiling, in the fields, in the food. Sometimes they are the food. You live with chickens that scratch inside the house. They enter, peck, sleep in the corner and leave when they feel like it. You don't question it, because if you question too much, you lose the egg. There are also the pigs. Ah, the pigs. They are your walking garbage disposal. Ate spoiled soup, throw it to the pig. Turnip peel, pig. Piece of old cloth. Pig too, incredibly enough. They eat everything. They are your emotional and alimentary trash can, and ironically, the main meal of the village. When winter arrives, you treat the pig with respect because one day he will be dinner. But not too much respect because he has also bitten your ankle twice. And the cats, they exist, but they aren't cute. They are skeletal creatures, with eyes that glow in the dark and an air of someone who knows too much. They serve to hunt rats, yes, but they also serve as frequent suspects of witchcraft. If you have a black cat and live alone, congratulations, you are 2 rumors away from becoming a bonfire. The dog, on the other hand, is more tolerated, especially if he is good at guarding or helping in the hunt. But don't expect affection. He doesn't come wagging his tail when you arrive. He comes because he heard a noise and is evaluating if you are a threat or food, sometimes both. Most dogs are nameless. At most, they receive nicknames like Black, Stink, or that one who bit the shoemaker. They live loose, fight among themselves, drag leftover bones through the streets and bark at everything that moves, including the wind. There are also horses, but those are luxury items. You don't have one. The feudal lord has one. The priest might have one. But you only dream of riding one. And even so, if you ride one, it is probably because something went wrong. Either you are fleeing or you are carrying a message to some place where you will die. Horses aren't friendly pets. They are tools. They work as much as you, carry loads, plow the earth, and sometimes look at you with a face that says, "We were both tricked by this society." You feel empathy, but don't comment. Now what you really have in abundance are pests, lice, fleas, bed bugs. They are part of the decoration. They are in your hair, in your clothes, in your bed. Sometimes they line up on your neck as if it were a buffet. You have already given up fighting. Scratch on one side, scrape on the other, and life goes on. Fleas, in fact, are a constant presence. You have already developed an internal system to ignore the itch. You only scratch if it is a lot, because scratching all the time causes calluses, literally. There are people in the village who have wounds from trying to get rid of the nuisance so much, but since there is no ointment, it stays that way. And the rats, well, they are the true owners of the house. They enter where they want, eat what they want, and make noise all night long. An orchestra of dissatisfied small rodents. They appear mainly at harvest time because they are smart and because they know you can't do anything against them. You tried in the beginning to set traps, shout, throw pieces of wood, but nothing works. The rats are resistant. They are practically medieval citizens with fur. And to complete the picture, they are the first to spread plagues. They literally carry infected fleas that out of nowhere start to decimate the village. Have you seen this? A rat, an outbreak, 100 funerals. You start to respect the rat, not out of admiration, but out of fear. He looks into your eyes while chewing your old bread, and you feel that there exists a veiled threat, a dark intelligence, and a sense of impunity that resembles certain nobles. You wonder if in some place in the future, rats will still be a problem. The answer you suspect is yes, because as long as there is food left out and distracted people, there will be rats. It is an eternal alliance, unwanted, but inevitable. And if you have a cow, you are lucky, because milk is a rare item. But she also demands care. She needs to be milked every day. And if you look at her the wrong way or forget to sing the milking song, yes, there is one. She doesn't give milk, or worse, she kicks you. And a cow kick has killed more people in the village than some wars. The roosters are the official alarm clock of your life. They scream before the sun comes up, scream after, scream during. Sometimes you think they scream just to affirm power, and they are right, because you can't do anything. And even if you could, you wouldn't have the energy. And the insects? Ah, the insects, flies, mosquitoes, beetles. They get into the food, land on your face, fly into your ear, and the worst part, they do it as if they had the right. You try to ignore them, wave your hand, pray to God, sometimes cry. Nothing solves it. At the end of the day, your relationship with animals is one of forced cohabitation. You live in the same space, use the same resources, and sometimes share diseases. A cycle of coexistence that no modern spa could understand. You look at the rat walking on the wall, he looks back at you, and for a second you share something, the weariness of existing, and just for that, you let him stay. You wake up with a cold that comes from inside your bones, not just from the air. A type of cold that dulls even the will to suffer. You breathe, see the straw around you, and try to decide if getting up is worth the price of movement. It is worth it, because you have to get up. No medieval disease waits for you to sleep a little more. The dampness of the night caught you off guard, and you feel cold sweat like a ghost's hug. In winter, everything survives better than you. The wet straw never dries. The mud turns to stone under your feet. Water freezes in jars, and even the rats learn to wait for the thaw. You scrub yourself, wring out the sheets, not that it helps, and get up to live another freezing day. The mud is majestic. It asks if you want to slide, fall, break a bone, and you answer yes, because every step you take is a challenge. You breathe, the air freezes instantly, and the sound is a scare. Every exhalation seems like a collective lament. Medieval nature is less beautiful and more brutal, like a cold without medicine. But every now and then, the sun appears and you almost cry with relief. Even if only for a few minutes, it makes you think. Maybe this walking cemetery they call life isn't so bad. You take the chance to dry the wet rags, heat the meal, look at the horizon with a trace of hope, however naive it may be. And when spring arrives, the weather changes. The cold turns to mud, sticky, less annoying but still annoying. The mud now splashes, covers your feet, slides down to your bones. The clothes dry with the smell of slime. The air gains insects, that irritating orchestra. You remember that the cold was bothersome and this sticky heat is worse. The seasonal celebrations happen between the months. Harvest festivals, solstice, planting. But you don't celebrate. You participate because you want something to mark time. Bad music, clumsy dancing, and a barrel of drink that is worth more than your self-esteem. You drink, feel warmth in your body, a heat of temporary emotional failure, and pretend to smile. The parties cure nothing, but they distract. They distract the body, distract the mind, distract the hell that is always lurking. You laugh, dance, trip over manure and laugh again, because laughing at your own emotional hole is a survival strategy or a fight with destiny. You haven't decided yet, and summer arrives with thirst. A sticky heat that doesn't respect the old, children or strangers. The days are long, uncomfortable. You have no shade. The sweat abandons you in the middle of the day, and what returns seems like weak coffee smelling of death. You try to pretend there is freshness inside the house, but the cracked walls hold the heat, suffocate you, and you wonder why you didn't suffer less in winter. In the end, the weather becomes the main character of your life. You survive it and it survives you. The winter dehydrates you. The summer ages you. The rain floods you. The sun burns you. And the seasons repeat, always slowly, always inclement, always reminding you that life is a cycle of resistance. And amidst all this, there are seasonal treatments. In winter, you try an herbal infusion if you have herbs, just to warm up. But the herb might be poisonous, and the wrong dose is your end. In spring, you try a potion for the channels to drain, take it in one gulp, and go semi-crazy for hours. In summer, you cut a vein if you feel feverish. Bloodletting is a universal option. In the autumn drought, you breathe depression. And in all these changes, you don't choose anything. The weather chooses for you. Each season is a different level of torture, and you go on, survive. And sometimes you even smile out of pure necessity. You walk to the field, trying not to slip. The shepherd hands you a hot bucket of liquid that he says is fermented carrot syrup. You smile, drink. It burns your throat and could cure you or kill you. Again, survival. Medieval life is this: unpredictable weather, fists of fog, furnace heat, humiliating mud, and parties that last 5 hours and remind you that nothing really improves. But for a few moments you forget. You climb on a barrel, drink in a crooked rhythm, and dance until you trip over someone strange. Then you remember. Nothing improves, but for 5 minutes everything seems bearable. And you think that is already luck. Your stomach has turned into a stopwatch, and not for meals, but for despair. Your belly growls every hour as if reminding you, hey, remember when you used to eat twice a day? Neither do I. But that is already in the past. Now you lick your fingers after touching a turnip just to see if you can trick your brain. The harvest was a disaster again. The seeds didn't thrive, the earth didn't collaborate, and the sky decided to go on strike from common sense. When it doesn't rain too much, it doesn't rain at all. And when it rains the right amount, that's a lie, it never rains the right amount. You tried planting barley, but the wind took it. Tried raising chickens, but the hungry neighbor took them too. The only thing that really grows here is hunger and the patience of priests to collect one more tax in the name of some saint who never shows up to help. The meal is now an exercise in creativity, a thin broth tasting of it's not poison, but it's not food either. A root boiled 3 times to soften, but which still scratches the roof of your mouth as if it were a divine punishment. You chew with discipline, because hunger in this era is resolved more with obedience than with seasoning. When winter tightens, you pray for spring to arrive soon. When it arrives, you remember that spring brings more work and the same problems, but with flowers, no one can eat. Still, everyone carries on, because between one disease outbreak and another, there are the festivals. Yes, the so-called medieval festivals. That breath of distraction in the midst of constant catastrophe, the promise of a day without working, or at least a moment to get drunk without guilt, or with guilt, but drunk. The harvest festival is only good if there is something to harvest. The spring one, good if the village isn't entirely coughing. And the one for the village patron saint depends on the saint. Some are more generous, others seem more sadistic, but deep down it is all the same. Out-of-tune music, clumsy dancing, wine that looks like vinegar, and bread that breaks teeth. You participate, of course, because refusing a party is being ungrateful, and being ungrateful is being looked upon poorly. And being looked upon poorly is ending up in the center of the village getting a public scolding or the rod, depending on the local chief's patience. The dances don't follow rhythm, they follow stumbling. You spin, fall, step on someone's foot, apologize, laugh, then pretend the cramp is emotion. The others do the same. No one knows if they are having fun or pretending so as not to seem weak. The drink helps. A sour grape broth fermented in a barrel that was once used to store fish. You drink it anyway because this is the flavor of popular anesthesia. One sip and the world seems less dry, less hard, less cruel. 2 sips and you even dance better, or less badly. 3. And maybe you can forget for a few hours that tomorrow you will have to go back to eating turnip broth with straw bran. During the parties, you see more relaxed faces, not happy, but relieved, as if the body had forgotten for brief minutes the collective tetanus in which it lives. Children run between drunk adults, some stumble, others vomit, a choreographed chaos, and you in the middle, half alert, half surrendered. But like everything in the medieval world, joy has a time to end. When the sun sets, the music stops. When the wine runs out, the fighting starts. There is always a guy who talks too loud, a woman who dances out of Christian rhythm, someone who knocks over the barrel. Chaos turns into confusion and someone gets beaten. Sometimes everyone. You go back home with the taste of vinegar in your mouth, dirt on your clothes, and a slight doubt if what you lived was a celebration or collective punishment with party decorations. And that is when the party happens, because in years of serious hunger, there isn't even that, just the silence of lack. The dates arrive but pass, without dance, without food, without a lit candle. The people gather in the chapel to pray for rain, for wheat, for a miracle, and return home with sore knees and empty hands. In these times, faces thin out, words diminish, the old disappear without much warning, children get sick, and no one has energy for drama. Hunger gives no time for grief. Have you seen people digging the ground looking for roots? Have you seen soup made with tree bark? Have you seen the village midwife prepare an emergency broth with grass, salt, and a faith that not even she believes in anymore? Everything becomes an attempt. Everything becomes food, even what shouldn't. And even so, there is a priest saying it is divine punishment, that it is lack of faith, that it is accumulated sin, that if you pray more, maybe the sky will forgive. But the sky only answers with more silence and a mist that steals any smell of food that might exist. Deep down, you go on because that is what remains. Not out of hope, but out of a lack of options, because dying on an empty stomach takes time. While that time runs, you dance one more time, drink one more sip, and pretend that this here isn't as bad as it seems. And in the middle of all this, a thought crosses your head like a crooked arrow. It could be worse. You laugh because you always can. You hear rumors that some people are fleeing your village, and not out of curiosity, but out of sheer desperation. The countryside is no longer a home. It is a minefield of drought, disease, and agony. The harvests fail, taxes increase, and the feudal lord seems to have discovered that hunger is a great motivator for free labor. Those who manage to leave go to the city, carrying 2 bundles of rags and more hope than money. The city is a place of promise, they say, but promising doesn't fill a belly. Still, it is what is left. You see people arriving dirty, dejected, with the look of someone who challenged the road and lost. They pass hungry in urban markets, where wheat costs double what it was worth at the last harvest. There is a merchant selling fried tree bark as a snack. You don't know whether to laugh or cry, because you know fried tree bark relieves nothing. The revolts start there. A hard loaf of bread costs as much as 3 days of work. And there are people who decide that enough is enough. They invade barns, demand food, scream. And the rural people listen to this with a mix of envy and fear. Envy for the fire of revolt, fear of the whip that comes in response. Have you seen this near here? In the neighboring village, some men went to the castle, complained, asked for a reduction in taxes on the mud they step on every day. The foreman laughed, sent guards. A dozen bodies returned in coffins. The rest returned kneeling. It is the price of audacity. In the city, revolts turn into riots, people tearing down shops, strikes, barricades, but all chaos points to one single point: hunger. When one eats less than nothing, one expects less than nothing. Revolt is just a reminder that before death, there is still hate stored up. And you planting, looking at the earth, wondering if it is worth running to the market or staying where you are visible. Because in the urban center, dying anonymously while walking is just as possible as dying while going to pick a turnip on the moon. The difference is that there it is with the critical gaze of many people. Here it is with the gaze of God, if he still has time to look. The migration continues, women carrying children on their shoulders, old people dragging macerated feet, carrying rags that smell of hope. The city grows with hungry people, markets swell, bread becomes a luxury item, and the rebels become inspiration for rumors. They say some ally themselves with thieves, others try to rob barns. But thief or revolution, everyone wants the same thing: to eat. This transforms city and countryside into a mirror of despair. In the countryside, the emptiness of the harvest. In the city, the emptiness of the plate. In the center, the emptiness of the promise that never arrives. You observe this from afar, listen to the stories around the fire. The migrant who had 3 children choked by hunger. The old man who went to the city to ask the king for mercy and got stoned. The priest who tried to feed the flock and ended up without the flock. If nothing drowns faith, the emptiness of the belly drowns everyone. But among the ashes of this debacle, inevitably something similar to union arises. Protesting in silence against destiny, sharing a yeast culture with those who lost more, helping to bury those who died of hunger. Because solidarity is a medieval value that not even the church taught. But hunger teaches better. And you, in the middle of all this, feel a strange nostalgia for what you never lived. You think if you could migrate, you would migrate. But you also think, if I migrate, I might become an urban statistic without bread, without land, without sense. So you remain dying of silent hatred, having faith in a tomorrow that looks like just more mold. Meanwhile, the rebels of the city gain nicknames. The famished, the desperate, the ghosts of the harvest. They flee to the fields, turn into bands. You watch this with a mixture of shame and envy. A revolutionary is someone who has the courage to die for something beyond hunger. And then, after everything, you think, at least the feudal lord still knows me. A consolation as mediocre as a boiled turnip. More consolation, because in the city you would be just another walking rag. Here you have a face, albeit a hungry one. You return to the field, step in the mud you already know. Look at the carcass of the harvest that rests from hunger as much as you, and kneel as always, but not to pray. You kneel to breathe your own discouragement, because migrating, revolting, dying, everything is part of medieval life, and you are still here. That is what counts. You hear a rumor arriving from afar. Today is a party day, the kind that mixes superstition, buried dog, and expired beer. It was born half big saint, half pagan. But then they decided to put a cross on it and call it apologetic lead of the church. Parties with masks, rituals, disguised oxen, and a sense that for a few minutes misery can dress up in costume. The Feast of St. Martin, for example, is one of those that mark the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. There are people carrying lanterns, children walking in procession with trembling little lights, the smell of roast goose or old chicken for those who don't have medieval xenophobia, new wine being served as if it were divine elixir. While you try to pretend you aren't thinking that if it weren't for the wind, everything would be just smoke, cold, and hunger. At night, there are giant bonfires. The people dance around them more to warm themselves than out of joy. People jump over flames as if it were a challenge of courage or a sign of fertility. With each jump, the flame seems to spit an ancient fear of cold, of disease, of seeing the money in your pocket turn to ash with the first bad wind. It is almost poetic. Almost. In the city, the burghs, these parties gain pagan versions Christianized, parades of people dressed as trades, blacksmith, court jester, sacred leper, historical recreations without art direction. Adults take part in arranged duels, sing in wrong Latin, raise beer mugs as if they were swords. You observe from the corner, knowing that killing boredom with a party is anything but saving lives. There is also the so-called Feast of Fools, a festival where the world up there turns upside down, the subdeacon becomes bishop, the altar boy becomes archbishop, and the priest stays on the bench washing feet. The mockery allowed for a few days, laughing at the rules, denying the hierarchy, mocking the sacred. For a few minutes the powerful cry, then go back to ordering the whip, and you go back to digging holes that no one will fill. These pagan parties, domesticated by the cross, give you embarrassed laughs. You laugh because you think laughing is safe, but you know that tomorrow everything goes back to normal or to worse than yesterday. The party is an escape valve, but the rest of the world keeps locking its bones in the cold, stomachs in the void, and eyes on inevitability. And then there are the little festivals in the markets, suspicious food, troubadours singing, "Oh, how sweet life is," while selling hard bread, handicrafts, cheesy music, fake armor, improvised fireworks. A bunch of people trying to retell a fantasy of nobility, while the smell of dead animals mixes with the general grime. The sound of an out-of-tune lute echoes like a scream of resistance against the usual silence. You participate, but without vibrating, because a party is emotional rest, not a cure. You dance just to not seem dead, laugh just to not seem rusty, and drink just to forget that there is tomorrow, that there is cold, that there is tiredness, that there is a ration of boiled root in sight. And the most ironic thing, it is at these parties that you realize that the smelliest people dress better. There are new clothes, unlikely dye, hoods, real glitter, or who knows, maybe vinegar, but they have it. And this hypnotizes, because poverty usually comes with patches, and the temporary party comes with shine, even if it is hot wax melted in hair. You feel envy of the fabric that wasn't yours, even knowing that soon it will stink along with the rest of the gang. The church adapts, buries the pagan with blessings, and reuses the bonfires as a symbol of light. The party becomes the celebration of the community, a better name to mask that the old nihilism remains alive. You observe, know that this is theological theatre to keep people busy, but even theatre relieves. Sometimes the party has a procession of the patron saint. They carry a statue on a cart with candles, incense, and improvised honors. Everyone kneels, prays, cries, then laughs in a second. It is standardized social emotion. You cross your arms to feign reverence, but think about the tear in your dress, about the fact that the saint never fed you. Still, you kneel out of habit, out of fear, out of survival. The festival ends, the bonfires go out, the out-of-tune singers drop their lutes. You go back to the straw, to the smell of collective sweat, to the temporary relief, and to the melancholy that waits in the dark. But for a few hours you lived another story, a story that said, "We are many, we are one." And this people can sing together, stumble together, and pretend they have a future. That is all the luxury left for those who have little. A half light, a half dance, a half faith. And you survive half partying, half crying, but alive. You reach the final point of a journey that didn't even need to exist, but which you, poor thing, decided to endure. You got up early, chewed turnip, survived the neighbor's cough, the plagues, the foreman's troops, the parties that didn't distract, and the harvests that didn't thrive. And now, here we are. End of the script, almost end of the night, almost end of you. But not totally. The sun says goodbye outside, or doesn't even appear depending on the season. You don't distinguish the time well anymore. Everything is twilight. Everything is a nap about to happen. Your mind is between, "I want to die once and for all," and "I want to sleep and let this bad dream end." It is the perfect anticlimax, because an entire medieval life is an accumulated anticlimax. Your body is so tired that sitting seems like a luxury. Standing up, don't even think about it. You blow out the lamp with a cold finger and give just one blink. A long, lazy blink, like someone who for their whole life only had time to get bored. The world spins slowly, and you spin with it. Every breath is a gargantuan effort, and even so, you are alive. Surviving this whole account of plague, hunger, sunstroke, cold, injustice, indignity is a type of medieval victory. It isn't celebrated with a banquet, nor with praise. It is celebrated by succumbing to sleep. And you, in this moment, are celebrating silently. You think about the children you will see tomorrow, maybe hungry, maybe feverish, but alive. You think about the old people who told you stories of when it was worse. You wanted to disagree, But remember that every second you have existed in such a screwed-up time already seems like a victory. And if living one more day just to repeat it all again makes you question the meaning, know this: the medieval meaning was to survive, and you reach the end of this script alive. That is already something monumental. Now breathe deep, smell the straw, taste the dust of the hours, feel the hope in the hardened straw pillow. It is bittersweet, but it is still something. Close your eyes. Don't start remembering the pigs, the rats, the nobles, the twisted justice. Let everything be quiet. The night is made to cease the interior noise that remains after a whole day of medieval drumming. You know that tomorrow morning, or not so early, the bell will ring again. Hunger will remind you it is there waiting, and tiredness will be contagious. But today, in this instant, you gain a truce, a night of rest, a sonic anticlimax as lazy as the rest of the script, nestled in the twilight, cradled by boredom which ironically saves you. And before sleep dominates you completely, if this cycle of medieval misfortune with a name and a story of its own brought you here, do a favor for your sanity and for this crooked narrative. Subscribe to the channel, because if you don't, YouTube thinks nobody can stand boring stories about hardened food. And then I'm left talking alone to the wall, and not even it can stand this sarcastic tone, embalmed in boredom anymore. Good night, tired listener, and until next time, sleep with a tired story.